On November 9, 1971, inside a stately Victorian mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, John Emil List executed one of the most shocking crimes in American history. Methodically and without outward emotion, he murdered his wife Helen, his mother Alma, and his 3 children, Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. The killings were not spontaneous. They were carefully planned over weeks. He used his 9mm pistol and his father's old revolver, striking each victim in turn. His mother was killed upstairs, while his wife and children were laid out on sleeping bags in the ballroom. To ensure the crime scene would not be discovered quickly, List left the lights on and the organ music playing. He even wrote a 5-page confession letter to his Lutheran pastor, justifying the murders as a way of saving his family's souls from what he believed was moral decline. Then, in an eerie display of control, he vanished. Neighbors and friends wondered why the grand mansion had gone dark. But inside, the family lay dead for nearly a month before police finally broke in. By then, John List was gone, his meticulous plan for escape already underway. This shocking massacre stunned America. Here was a man who appeared to be the model of middle-class respectability, a church-going accountant, father, and husband. But beneath that calm surface was a man burdened with debt, struggling with his wife's illness, and consumed by rigid religious convictions. The murders weren't just an act of violence. They were the ultimate attempt by List to control a life he felt was slipping out of his hands. The discovery of the bodies in the silent house marked the beginning of a nationwide manhunt that would last nearly 2 decades. After killing his family, John List disappeared as if the earth had swallowed him whole. In reality, he had slipped into a new identity. He became Robert Peter Clark, a quiet man who blended easily into society. First, he traveled by train to Michigan, then to Colorado, where he worked as an accountant and lived modestly. For years, he avoided close friendships, careful not to let anyone probe too deeply into his past. His meticulous nature, so chilling in the murders, was now channeled into building a convincing new life. In Denver, he remarried a woman named Dolores. Together, they eventually moved to Richmond, Virginia, where he became a regular churchgoer once again. To his new neighbors and community, he was a polite, unassuming man, devoted to faith and routine. No one suspected that the man sitting in the pews on Sunday mornings had once annihilated his entire family. Meanwhile, the murders in Westfield had become a cold case. The mansion where the killings took place was destroyed by fire in 1972, erasing much of the physical evidence. Detectives never stopped searching, but without digital databases, DNA tools, or modern surveillance, John List remained a ghost. What haunted many was not only how he got away, but also how ordinary he seemed. He wasn't living as a fugitive in the shadows. He was building a new, comfortable suburban life, all while the memories of his slain family lingered in the silence he left behind. 18 years passed. For nearly 2 decades, the man who had committed one of America's worst family massacres lived in plain sight. But his carefully constructed disguise would soon be torn apart. Not by police work alone, but by the power of television and the eyes of millions of Americans. For nearly 18 years, John Emil List believed he had escaped justice. He had walked out of his Westfield, New Jersey mansion in November 1971, leaving behind the bodies of his wife, mother, and 3 children, and vanished into thin air. He built a new identity as Robert Peter Clark, an accountant who lived quietly, remarried, and attended church as if nothing had happened. But in 1989, fate and television caught up with him. The Westfield murders were one of New Jersey's most shocking crimes. Yet for nearly 2 decades, a trail had gone cold. Detectives never stopped thinking about the case. But with no digital databases, DNA technology, or surveillance networks, John List managed to slip through the cracks. The mansion where the crimes took place burned down in 1972, erasing physical evidence. Still, the confession letter he had left for his pastor, chillingly rational in tone, remained preserved in police files. Then came the new age of crime-fighting television. America's Most Wanted, hosted by John Walsh, was building a reputation for catching fugitives by putting their faces on national TV. Producers chose to feature the John List case in 1989. The problem was simple. No one knew what he looked like anymore. He had been gone for 18 years. That's when forensic sculptor Frank Bender stepped in. Bender created a clay bust predicting List's appearance as an older man. He studied his past photos, considered his personality, and made guesses. Receding hairline, sagging cheeks, wire-rimmed glasses, conservative, reserved, neat. When the bust was unveiled, it looked startlingly realistic, almost as if List himself had sat for it. When the episode aired in May 1989, millions of Americans watched. The bust appeared on screens across the country, accompanied by the haunting story of a man who had killed his entire family and then disappeared. For most viewers, it was a chilling story of evil hiding in plain sight. But for one neighbor in Richmond, Virginia, it was something else: recognition. The neighbor knew a man named Robert Clark, who lived nearby with his wife Dolores. The resemblance between Clark and the bust was uncanny. The neighbor called the FBI. Within days, investigators confirmed the lead. On June 1st, 1989, FBI agents arrived at Clark's modest Richmond home. When John List answered the door, he showed no panic. He did not flee, fight, or even seem surprised. He simply adjusted his glasses as agents informed him. He was under arrest for the murders of his family. His wife, Dolores, was stunned. She had lived with him for years, never suspecting he was one of America's most wanted fugitives. At first, List denied everything. He insisted he was Robert Clark. But fingerprints taken from military records prove his true identity beyond doubt. The man who had lived as a quiet accountant and churchgoer was indeed John Emil List, the cold-blooded murderer from New Jersey. Extradited to New Jersey, John List faced 5 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in 1990 and quickly became a media spectacle. Reporters crowded the courtroom. The public, horrified yet fascinated, followed every word. The prosecution laid out the evidence, the sequence of killings, the 5-page confession letter, and the meticulous steps List took to delay discovery. Cutting himself out of family photos, stopping mail and milk deliveries, leaving lights on and organ music playing to make the house appear lived in. They argued this was not a crime of passion or a breakdown, but a calculated execution designed to free him from financial ruin and family responsibility. The defense countered with a plea of diminished capacity. They claimed John List was mentally ill, suffering from depression, and overwhelmed by financial and personal pressures. His wife Helen was an alcoholic. His daughter Patricia dreamed of becoming an actress, something List disapproved of, and his finances were collapsing. According to the defense, List convinced himself that killing his family was an act of mercy, sending their souls to heaven before the corruption of the world could reach them. But the jury wasn't persuaded. The letter to his pastor revealed careful planning, not mental collapse. The way he staged a house, calmly disappeared, and started a new life all pointed to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. After 9 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on all 5 counts of murder. On May 1st, 1990, John List was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms, the maximum punishment allowed under New Jersey law at the time. He showed little visible reaction as the sentence was read. For many, his lack of remorse was as chilling as the crimes themselves. In prison, List kept a low profile. He spent his days reading, writing, and occasionally giving interviews. Journalists who spoke with him described him as soft-spoken, polite, and eerily calm, the same demeanor he had maintained during his trial. But his explanations remained unchanged. He continued to insist that the murders were not acts of cruelty but misguided mercy, claiming he feared his family would suffer spiritually and financially if they lived. Psychologists who studied him called him rigid, prideful, and controlling. Faced with failure and loss of status, he chose to eliminate his problems rather than confront them. To the end, he seemed incapable of true empathy or remorse. John List's second wife, Dolores, divorced him after his arrest. She could not reconcile the mild-mannered man she knew with the killer he truly was. List never remarried. Instead, he lived out his remaining years behind bars, largely forgotten except when documentaries or crime programs revisited his case. On March 21st, 2008, John List died in prison at the age of 82 from complications of pneumonia. There was no public mourning, no grieving family left to remember him. He had destroyed the very people who might have cared. His death marked the quiet end of one of America's most chilling true crime stories. John List's story remains infamous not only because of the brutality of his crime, but because of how long he evaded justice. For 18 years, he managed to live a seemingly ordinary life, proving how easily evil can hide behind a mask of normalcy. It also highlighted the power of modern media. Without America's Most Wanted and Frank Bender's brilliant forensic bust, John List might never have been found. The case became a landmark in how television and public participation could bring fugitives to justice. For the people of Westfield, the memory of the silent mansion never faded. The lights left burning, the organ music still echoing in neighbors' minds, and the horror of discovering 5 bodies in what should have been a safe family home. These scars lingered long after the house itself burned down. And for America, the story of John List endures as both a cautionary tale and a grim reminder. It shows the danger of unchecked pride, rigid beliefs, and hidden despair. It proves that justice, though delayed, can still arrive, even after nearly 2 decades. And it leaves one final haunting truth. Sometimes the most ordinary neighbor, the quietest man in the pews, hides the darkest secrets of all.